Good afternoon. My name is Melany Baldwin, and I'm here today, fortunately, from the invitation of Stanford University, Dr. Chu, Sarah, and also from Zen Hospice Project, George and Jeff, and also through the kind writing of a writer from the New York Times named John Mooallem, who kind of got a story out there that brought me here today. Today, the story I'm going to talk about is about, I like to call it Zen and the gift of motorcycle maintenance. That's what I would call it. It's about two men whose paths crossed in sort of an unusual way, and it changed the course of both of their lives forever. This is my son. His name is Randy Sloan. Beautiful boy, sweet boy, loving person. Loved San Francisco. Loved living here to a very large amount. Genius level IQ, but chose to be a motorcycle technician, build high-speed motorcycles because that's what he loved to do. He lived authentically every single day of his life. He lived in San Francisco on a street called Page Street, which is typical in San Francisco. If you're 26 years old, you're living in one of these layers of a 3-story building, and you have 2 roommates, and in his case, a dog. And he was the lucky one because he got to live in the living room, which is the biggest room in the house, because he had the dog. Loved living there. This was his room. As would expect, a 26-year-old with posters everywhere, motorcycle, hot rod magazines, and his helmets and things everywhere. This is a typical day for Randy, with his dog, Desmo, who he loved like a child, walking on Alamo Square, enjoying walking to work every day at Scuderia, where he was a motorcycle mechanic. He loved his mom. And he loved most of all to go up to Twin Peaks, and what I learned later was at night, and drive down at 75 miles an hour with no lights on, because he was just that kind of guy. And in San Francisco, he truly felt like he was on top of the world. In April 2014, I got a call from my son, and he said, "Mom, I met this really cool guy." And he came into the shop the other day, and he asked me if I would build him a motorcycle, which was not unusual because they did that kind of thing there. He was a genius at mechanical artistry and could do that thing very simply and easily. And this is who had walked into Scuderia. His name is B.J. Miller. He's a physician here in San Francisco. And he walked in and said he met Randy, and it was a fast friendship. They immediately fell into a man crush. And the reason I guess it was a bit remarkable that BJ had walked into Scuderia is because in his youth, prior to medical school, he had been in an accident and he had lost 3 of his limbs. So he had been turned down multiple times to build a motorcycle, as you can imagine, because people weren't exactly sure how to do that. They weren't exactly sure how to make all the gears work with just one hand operating them. But my son felt like he could do that, so he didn't take any pause when he said, "Yeah, I'll do that for you." And so what ensued was a 4-month complicated build of a motorcycle for this man. And I would get phone calls from Randy that said, "So Mom, if you're 6'5", and you've lost both your legs, and you've made prosthesis for yourself, do you make yourself the same height again?" So that was just my son. The truth is, he didn't. He made himself only 6'4.5". And his reason for that was because walking through doorways, 6'5" was a little tall, but if he had made himself 6'4", his arms would have been too long. So he made himself the perfect thing in the middle. And so my son went about building this bike for BJ. He went about inspecting every tiny little thing that he could. And then he told me this one day on Facebook. He told the world this, actually. He said, "This is BJ. He came to us wanting to ride a motorcycle. He has no legs and one arm. After heavy modifications, we made his dream reality. He drove right down the ramp, stopped, said thank you so much, cried, then drove off like a champ. Huge balls, changing lives." And he took this photo, and he cried. And he said, "That guy's a legend." Fast forward to April 2015, one short year later, and I was living in Chicago. I was caregiving my mom down in Monterey. She had just gotten out of the hospital. It was on a Saturday. I get a phone call from Randy, and he said, "Mom, I haven't been feeling well. It's really difficult for me to walk the Husky up the hills in San Francisco, and I'm wondering if you would come and go with me to the doctor." And since I was 2 hours south, I said, "Sure, I'll come up," thinking I'm going up for a day trip and back. So we went to an acute care clinic 2 blocks from his house. We walked in, and the physician there said, "You look like you're in a lot of pain." Gave him pain meds to begin with before she ever did any exam. Then did an x-ray, and then told us, "Where we're supposed to see a left lung on the x-ray, we see nothing but darkness. You need to get to the hospital right away. Something's wrong." So we drove back 2 hours to Monterey, since my mom was still just out of the hospital. I took him to Community Hospital of Monterey Peninsula, and that evening he had 4 liters of fluid taken off of his left lung. That's a lot. The next day, because they felt like he had an empyema, which is a hardened pneumonia, they went in and did a surgery to remove that. And an hour and a half into a 3-hour surgery, the surgeon came out and said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your son has some sort of cancer, and it's all over his left lung, it's all over his diaphragm, and it's all over his heart." And you sometimes just have a moment in your life that your life looked like this before, and then it looks like this after. That was a defining moment like that. And they said, "It looks like mesothelioma, but he's way too young for that disease at 26 years old." So I've called in a specialist, Dr. Bradley, to come look at him, and come to find out that is what he had. But my son, just having got out of surgery, didn't realize that he had an illness that was going to be terminal. He came out both thumbs up, ready to go. Because that's such a terrible diagnosis at such a young age, they gave him every accommodation in the world. His dog was free to come see him. His dog was free to come see him in his room. And because he was such an unusual case, they agreed to take him at UCSF as a patient by a world-renowned mesothelioma expert, Dr. Terry Jahan and Dr. David Jablon at UCSF. And when I realized that he was going to get transferred to UCSF, in researching those 2 doctors, I realized that Dr. B.J. Miller is part of their team in the palliative care side. So I emailed to BJ and I said, "Hi BJ, I'm Melany, and my son Randy, Sloan, built a motorcycle for you about a year ago. I don't know if you remember him, but he's had this diagnosis of mesothelioma, and he's coming back to San Francisco. Would you go see him?" And he said, Go see him. That guy made my dreams come true. Of course I'll go see him. I'll take him as a patient. And so he did. And the first thing they did when he got to UCSF was to give him a PET scan to see, has his cancer gone somewhere else? Could it get worse than having triple mesothelioma? In fact, it had metastasized to Randy's brain. And so he met Dr. Penny Sneed, who was the head of radiation oncology at UCSF, brilliant, who then told Randy that in order to have use of his motor skills within the next 5 to 10 days, he needed to have whole brain radiation times 10 times to stop the brain tumor that was on the stem of his brain from growing any further, or that in the next 5 to 10 days he would be completely unable to function. So my son decided to have that. And he had me take some photos of what that looks like. And he had himself bolted down to the table. And he had the whole brain radiation done to give him just a little more time of having dignity. Because from outward signs, he didn't have anything that looked like he was ill. And he didn't want to. He wanted to maintain his dignity. He knew he was terminally ill, but he still wanted to maintain dignity. And so he had some fun times playing with the nurses there at UCSF. And then he saw how much energy and time it took to take his medications so many times every day, and his body began failing him. His heart couldn't pump fluid up from his feet, so his feet became very large and they broke open. He lost dignity then. So he began to think about, what can I do I know that I have less than 6 months to live. What are my options? And BJ came to him and said, well, your options are going home, with hospice nursing coming 2 to 3 times a week, which in Randy's environment, living with the 3 roommates and his dog wasn't really that big of an option, or going to a nursing home. And Randy, I couldn't bear to tell that guy that that's what he was going to do for the rest of his life. So he offered a third option, which was a place called Zen Hospice Project. And Randy decided that that's what he would do. This is Zen Hospice Project. And it just so happened that it's 3 blocks down Page Street, the same street that my son lived on, and he walked there to take himself in. This was his room there. That was his room there for about 30 minutes until all of his motorcycle friends and family came and modified it to a 20-something-year-old dude room. And then we had some fun. We went out to his favorite drinking holes. We went out to enjoy his life that he had in the mission. And then as Randy became more visibly ill, he had a couple of special requests that he wanted final. One of them was to sail to Angel Island, which is something that he did with his friends every Sunday. They'd go to Sausalito, they'd get on the sailing boat, they'd sail to Angel Island, and they'd hike to the top. So he did that. And we took him on that. And his friends hiked with him on their back up Angel Island and gave him that last gift. And his sister got to go. And he got to take that perspective in his last days here on earth. So 36 hours later, my son was gone. 36 hours later, BJ called his friends at Scuderia and said, Randy's passed away. We're going to give him a flower petal ceremony. And that ceremony is something that they give at Zen Hospice Project for friends and family to come and place a flower petal on the deceased and tell them their goodbye. So if you can imagine 20 motorcyclists, they shut Scuderia down, closed it, and 20 motorcycles converged on this beautiful house there in San Francisco, and they put all their helmets in one big pile, and they said their goodbyes to my son with these flowers. And in true Randy Sloan style, he decided to donate his body to UCSF for research of mesothelioma. This is my son. Love him forever. And my point is that when you know that you have a terminal illness, my son's illness was only 7 weeks in duration. Very short time, which was a blessing. But when medical intervention is done, it's live. Live. Live while you can. For my son, he'll be forever young to me.
Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young.
Thank you.